Greetings, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us for the latest installment of the Centurus Business Analytics Education Series. Today we'll be discussing IBM Software Licensing and tips to safeguard your bottom line that will enable you to save money, reduce risk, and remain in compliance with regards to your IBM software assets. So today's agenda. We will, after a brief introduction, we will discuss various components of IBM software pricing. The audience, by the way, ranges sort of from really anyone responsible for or interested in IBM software asset management, including but not necessarily limited to IBM system administrators, IBM site admins, Cognos site admins, legal and or procurement folks who are, again, very interested in minimizing audit risk while optimizing cost and utilization of your IBM software assets. So to that end, our agenda includes discussing some of the licensing metrics and considerations around those. We'll dive into user and capacity-based licensing, talk about software renewals and some of the gotchas around that. Then we'll look into Passport Advantage and some of the licensing information documents, discuss software audits, discuss maintaining compliance, after which we'll give you a brief overview of Centurus, discuss some additional resources, and do a Q&A with whatever time we have left over. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Carson Bradshaw, who is our Director of Client Solutions and is an 18-year business analytics veteran who has spent formative time working for Cognos and various IBM business partners and resellers. In addition to numerous technical certifications from leading enterprise BI software companies, he holds sales certifications from IBM for Cognos, TM1, SPSS, and more. In other words, he's an expert in all things IBM analytics and is more than qualified to discuss the topic at hand today. My name is Mike Weinhauer. I'm your host today. I am the Practice Area Director and Product Manager for our software connector products here at Centurus. I've been selling and delivering analytics solutions for the better part of a quarter century now, and am pleased to be here with Carson delivering the content here today. So welcome, everyone. We'd like to start these and lead off our presentations by getting a feel for what our audience is thinking and what they're doing in their organizations. And so today's poll, which you'll have the chance to respond to here, which, thank you for displaying that, Andrea, is what do you think is the most common reason for being out of compliance, for lack of compliance with IBM software licensing? And you can choose one out of the five, and that's really, are you over deployed? In other words, the number of users is greater than the number of entitlements that you have. Is it unrestricted user? In other words, you have a consumer that has more rights than they really need. Improper use of PVU-based subcapacity licensing, which means, for example, if you've bought or you have entitlements for 280, but you've actually deployed 1120, and then, or have you implemented PVU licenses without the use of IBM's ILMT tool? In other words, did you fail to deploy the ILMT, the IBM License Metric Tool, within the required 90 days? And then the last option there is, do you have unauthorized non-production environments? In other words, did you only acquire product PVU licenses, but maybe also deployed those in dev, test, or QA, UAT, et cetera, without having the proper entitlements? So whatever you think is the most common reason, please go ahead and respond to that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Looks like we're getting all the answers we're going to get. So interestingly, most people think the answer was that they were over deployed with 18% split improper use of PVU-based subcapacity or implemented improper use of PVU-based subcapacity license, 5% unauthorized. Interesting spread here. So by far and away, most people said over deployed. So interesting set of answers there. And Carson, was there actually a sort of a correct answer here?
Yeah, the correct answer was improper use of PVU-based subcapacity licensing.
There you go. So you 18% of who said improper use of subcapacity licensing were correct. So Thanks for weighing in on the poll there. And let's see, we're going to hide the poll, get back to our presentation. And with that, so we'll get into the content here, and I'll hand the microphone over to Carson. Carson, floor is yours.
Thanks, Mike. So after a streak of acquisitions over the last decade, IBM is now the third largest software publisher with 270 different license metrics, over 31,000 unique part numbers at 9 different price levels. So with that in mind, I'm going to start with a high-level overview of IBM Business Analytics licensing and best practices for managing software assets. In addition to advice that'll help you reduce risk and avoid costly audits by maintaining compliance. And I'm also going to pepper with tips throughout the presentation, which should be of value for those responsible for managing licensing, risk, and compliance. So we're going to start with IBM license types. The majority of IBM on-premise software products are available via indefinite or perpetual-based licenses. Many are now available as cloud or even hybrid cloud. Centurus has helped our clients compare and contrast the on-premise versus cloud-based licenses, which are typically flat compared to the on-premise equivalents, but have other nuances that should be taken into consideration, such as product limitations and lack of features and functionality, which can present issues with system migrations for existing customers. Also technical factors, such as performance, scalability, and system maintenance. And I want to touch on IBM user and capacity-based licenses. The majority of IBM Analytics software products are available on the authorized user metric. Some of the products, such as SPSS Modeler, are also available via concurrent user, which can be advantageous for a pool of users that only need occasional access to the product. The most common metric for capacity-based licensing is processor value unit, also known as PVU, which is based on processor technologies. There's a few other capacity-based licenses such as UVU and RVU, but the most common in the analytics space is PVU, which we're going to spend quite a bit of time on today. So there's essentially 2 deployment options for PVU, which are full capacity and subcapacity. The key point here is that full capacity requires that you license every processor core in the physical server, and you can't acquire a server nowadays that has less than 16 to 32 cores, many of which have 64 or greater. This means that you have to leverage IBM subcapacity licensing or license the entire server, which can be extremely costly, which many IBM customers have learned the hard way. And the next slide here is the IBM PVU Calculator. The 2 key elements for determining your cost of PVU licensing are 1, the processor technology itself, and 2, the number of processor cores. I've provided a very basic example here to demonstrate the calculation, but this is actually a very complex model that not only requires the specific processor model number and use, but also the number of logical cores on the physical processors. And while it's relatively easy to determine IBM's price per unit, which does vary by product, the actual PVU license requirements are further convoluted by the fact that the value also increases for system boards that have a greater number of physical processor sockets, regardless of whether the sockets are currently occupied. For example, the latest Xeon processors require only 70 units per core for 2 sockets, but increase to 100 units for 4 sockets and up to 120 for more than 4 sockets, which is an uplift of 70% for the same number of cores. And keep in mind that the PVU metric is linear, so moving from 100 units to 200 is literally double the cost. And most customers are not aware of these technical details when they conduct a tech refresh and replace the underlying application servers. So the key takeaway here is that fewer processor cores that are exposed to the software product through the use of subcapacity licensing will greatly reduce both the upfront and ongoing investment. However, there are definitely some caveats that customers need to be aware of when leveraging this subcapacity licensing model. And I've provided here 3 links to IBM's site to confirm eligibility. But the key to maintaining compliance with subcapacity is deploying IBM's license metric tool, also known as ILMT, which is now mandatory for all subcapacity licenses. The only exceptions are organizations that license at full capacity, which generally speaking is exponentially more expensive, or those that have less than 1,000 employees, which by default puts many clients out of compliance. This often results in severe penalties, even if current usage aligns with their active entitlements. So one example, we're currently working with a bank that's being audited with a contractual liability of over $8 million for an environment that was technically not over deployed. but was deemed non-compliant since they didn't install and configure the ILMT, produce quarterly reports, and maintain those for a 2-year period, which was not even required at the time that they originally purchased these licenses and deployed the PVU environment. So now I'm going to shift gears here and talk about the IBM Software Subscription Renewals. Many of you are probably familiar with this program, which most vendors refer to as annual software maintenance, or S&S in the IBM world. By their very nature, the fixed-term licenses must be renewed for continued usage, and the SaaS-based license subscriptions must be renewed to maintain the cloud environment. However, the perpetual licenses are elective, and clients are able to continue to leverage products without S&S coverage. That said, it is highly recommended to maintain access to system updates and upgrades, technical support services, etc., which does require active S&S. And if this coverage lapses, customers are required to purchase license reinstatements, which are roughly 70% of the cost of the net new licenses, which is far more than 3x the renewal fees in almost every scenario. And just want to share a couple the gotchas here. For example, per IBM's Cloud's Terms of Use, or TOU, many of these SaaS agreements are set to auto-renew. So customers and BPs can specifically state start and end dates at the onset, but if they're not specifically stated at the time the order is placed and processed, then a 90-day advance notice is required for cancellation, which can be another painful and costly surprise. For those customers that secured upfront discounts on the entitlement price from IBM, which is the vast majority, IBM will typically impose a year-over-year uplift ranging from 10 to 15% until the current entitled price is attained. This is for on-premise licenses, and it's generally around 5% uplift for those that are on a SaaS subscription renewal. And then the last point here is that IBM will oftentimes uplift the S&S for retained licenses when customers attempt to drop support for active entitlements, which can oftentimes negate anticipated savings in the short term. In some cases, clients have requested to drop some licenses from their renewal, and the result is actually a much higher price than the original quote with those same licenses. So an offer here, Centurus can help negotiate this process on your behalf, review your current entitlements compared to actual usage, and ensure that the year-to-year uplifts align with IBM's policy. And in any case, we can secure discounts off the price from IBM Direct. So now to talk about some of the legal agreements here that govern and all the terms and conditions. IBM requires either a Passport Advantage or a Passport Advantage Express agreement as the legal umbrella to acquire, renew, and subscribe all licenses. The key difference is the Passport Advantage Express licenses must be renewed separately throughout the calendar year, whereas the PA sites automatically co-terminate with all license acquisitions and associated renewals based on the customer-designated anniversary date. This means that if you have more than one PAC site, which is very common, it creates more overhead administration ranging from site admin to legal, procurement, and accounts payable. And it's also not eligible for variable pricing levels, which applies to other IBM software products. And then the other area to note here is the License Information Documents, or LI portal, as IBM defines it. IBM provides this site to search for the LI documents by product name, program number, etc. And these documents contain specific terms of use, including limitations, which do need to be monitored as IBM reserves the right to modify these over time via announcements. However, many of these enterprise programs do not provide a licensing key generator and are truly based on an honor system, which does expose clients to risk. And therefore, it is the customer's responsibility to designate the appropriate number of users and/or capacity, as well as the individual access rights for the various user roles as highlighted herein, which can be rather complex in nature. And so to that end, Centurus has compiled several different licensing matrices to help provide our clients with better visibility into the specific access rights for the IBM Business Analytics solutions, such as this example here for Cognos Analytics. And we do offer deep expertise on new licensing, leverage our partnership with IBM to secure aggressive discounts on net new licenses based on volume, previous investment with IBM, and purchasing time frame. And on that note, I will provide another tip here that IBM operates on halves based on calendar year. So the best time to acquire a license is the end of the first half, or better yet, the end of the second half, which ends in December. And now we move on to the audits, the dreaded audits. So these IBM compliance reviews are time and resource intensive for all parties, software vendor, the auditor, and the customer. And since IBM is far more complex and expensive compared to many other software publishers, customers face a greater financial risk if IBM finds that their software portfolio is non-compliant. An ITAM review article noted that audits are big business. A quarter of IBM software revenue is said to be generated by software auditors. Another quote from PC World states that IBM aggressively pursues audits of customers based on its perception of potential non-compliance. And in years prior, the focus was mainly large enterprise accounts with the highest yield, but in the last few years, we've seen a dramatic uptick in audits in the small to medium-sized business space, as well as what IBM refers to as commercial space. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but did want to share kind of a high-level overview of IBM's resolution framework principles. These audits can take anywhere from 3 months to 3 years to get resolved, but typical duration is around 6 to 18 months from commencement to conclusion. And as noted below, if a customer is found out of compliance, IBM asks them to pay for the delta between the current usage and their entitlements, along with 2 years of retroactive maintenance and renewal, the S&S that we mentioned previously. So IBM is responsible for paying the third-party audit partners, which are typically the Big Four, Deloitte & Touche and KPMG. So there's no doubt that the compliance program is a planned source of revenue, which often results in tens of thousands or even tens of millions of dollars in settlements. Of course, this is extremely difficult for most firms to handle since the cash outlay is not budgeted or forecasted. And while IBM customers may not be able to prevent an audit, they can certainly limit the triggers that lead to perception of incompliance. And better yet, customers could take the necessary precautions to confirm and maintain compliance, which can save time, resources, and unnecessary frustrations. So this next slide here, we don't have time to walk through all of the recommendations, but would definitely strongly suggest that you download the presentation if this is of interest. And we certainly recognize that managing all of this can be overwhelming, so we encourage you to contact Centurus and leverage our team of experts for guidance and support. All that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike Weinhauer, who will provide the details of an offer from Centurus, an overview of our firm, some other valuable resources, and then we'll conduct a live Q&A session.
That's great. Thanks, Carson. Appreciate that overview. Certainly seems like there's a lot to understand there, a lot of potential pitfalls, and a lot of reasons why you might want to pick up the phone and call the experts here at Centurus. I wonder if there's an inverse correlation between stock performance and quantity of audits, but there's something in there. So we'd love to offer you, the attendees of this webinar, a free IBM licensing review where we can potentially find you cost savings off the negotiated price from IBM Direct. We will do an assessment of your current licensing, including authorized and concurrent users, your PVUs, RVUs, and other applicable licensing metrics. And we will also review your production and non-production environments and actual license usage to help make sure that you're, again, minimizing that risk, those audit triggers, and optimizing your IBM software spend and assets. If this sounds interesting to you, you can go to the link here at the bottom of this deck, which is, again, available after the webinar. And to schedule your review, you can also email us at info@centurus.com. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Centurus, I'd like to take a second to tell you a little bit about who we are, and then I'll give you point you to some great resources at the end. At Centurus, we bridge the gap between data and decision making. We're great at providing clarity from the chaos of complex business requirements, disparate data sources, and constantly moving targets. We've made a name for ourselves because of our strength at bridging the gap between IT and the business users. We deliver solutions that give you access to reliable, analysis-ready data across your organization so you can quickly and easily get answers at the point of impact, the decisions you make, and the actions you take within your organization. Our consultants are top-notch experts with lots of experience. They have pragmatic real-world experience and the experience advancing the state of the art. We're so confident in our team and our methodology that we back our projects with a 100% money-back guarantee. Our client breadth here in this slide gives you a good idea of the range of industries we've worked in. We've delivered thousands of successful projects for thousands of hundreds of different clients, from the Fortune 500 to the mid-market. We've solved business problems across many industries and functional areas, including the Office of Finance, Sales and Marketing, Manufacturing, Operations, HR, and IT. So if you need someone to help you with your next analytics project, we'd love the opportunity to leverage our vast experience in analytics for you. Some great upcoming events we have. On Friday, we've started a really exciting weekly wind down program. So you can register for this over at centurus.com/events, where it's a 30-minute quick session where our trainers share their favorite tips. And then the one that we're featuring tomorrow is all about dates in Tableau. So we'll show the difference between discrete and continuous dates and show you how to create custom dates and use date calculations. So that'll be a great topic. Then we also have another webinar next week, so 1 week from today, at 11 a.m., where we'll talk about the Tableau dashboard starters for Salesforce, and we call that finishing what they started. So show you what comes out of the box and what you might need or want to do and how we can help you really get the most out of those. We got a few other great events coming up as well, including our Tableau Like a Pro in half a day. It's a free beginner workshop that we're having in Palo Alto, and that is Wednesday, August 29th, and that's in the morning session, 8:30 to 12:30, and then we have an afternoon session where we show you how to use Tableau to visualize Salesforce data. Again, those are both free half-day workshops in Palo Alto. You can register for those at centurus.com/events, and certainly check back there frequently for upcoming events that might be of interest to you. And with that, I'd like to invite you to visit, once again, centurus.com/Centurus Resources, or I believe Resources works as well, where you can see our blog and our resource library. So the blog, great place to find out what's top of mind at Centurus. We have some great authors from our entire team of analytics experts on a range of topics, from Tableau to Cognos, best practices, et cetera, et cetera. And our resource library is an extensive free library of past webinars, demos, white papers, presentations, hints and tips, and whatnot. That's all free and accessible to you. And that is also where the recording for this will be presented. You can go in there, for example, and search for Tableau, and you'll find all our Tableau webinars, and you'll find recordings and downloadable decks, and then oftentimes things like Tableau workbooks, relevant information to those webinars. We also offer a full course of training offerings. So we offer Tableau and Cognos training. So we invite you to visit our Centurus site under training, and you can view our course schedule looking at the link below there. You can sort it by date, you can pick by platform. We have choosing a Cognos class and choosing a Tableau class, which lets you compare the offerings in those classes so that you can pick the right training based upon your skill level and requirements. And we do as well offer custom training as well, where we can sort of configure that training to your organization's needs. So with that, we will move into the Q&A section here now. So Carson, I think you've been looking at the question log here, and we might have a few questions we can bring up in the Q&A here.
Yeah, we sure do. So the first one here is there a difference in the SDK that's included with the admin license rule and the standalone Cognos Analytics SDK, referring to the capability slide matrix? The answer is no. There is no difference. In the past, customers had to purchase a separate license for SDK, but as of July 2014, IBM made some major changes there to license model, and they included the SDK rights within the admin license. So that's actually a good point, because anyone who has an admin that's also using the SDK could potentially drop the separate SDK license from their IBM renewals and yield some cost savings there. Another question we got here is IBM still renewing PVU-based consumer licenses? The answer is yes. However, the consumer license has been deprecated. In fact, it was that same time, July 2014, where they made all the changes and consolidated. And as you noted there was 14 levels of licensing at that time. And so they've essentially deprecated that license, but they will continue to renew. And what they've done is converted the consumer role into what they're now referring to as analytics users. And then they've taken the roles below that, which were recipient and remote recipient, and those were converted to IBM information distribution licenses. So you can't continue to renew, and in fact, there will be additional functionality but there was not available there at the consumer role at that time. Another question here, can Cognos Analytics be deployed to PVU model? The answer is yes. Some products such as Cognos can be licensed on either the authorized user metric, the PVU, or a combination thereof. Other products such as SPSS Server and TM1 or Plan Analytics Local, as it's now known, require the use of PVU-based licenses, with the exception of some enterprise bundles that are far more expensive. And another question here, we have multiple PAX sites. Can those be easily consolidated into a single renewal? The answer is yes. Centurus can help you migrate from PAX to a single PA with some basic paperwork, but we typically recommend about 4 to 6 weeks for processing time prior to the next renewal date. And so if you've just done a renewal, you could certainly do it thereafter, and it will help co-terminate based on an anniversary date that you select. And another question here, is a separate license required for non-production? Great question that leads to a lot of compliance-related issues. So a separate non-production is not required for those customers that are only licensed on the authorized user metric. IBM permits what they call, quote unquote, a reasonable number of non-production environments, such as development, test, and QC. You just can't exceed the number of users in your non-production environments that you've purchased for production. However, any PVU product from IBM, Cognos, SPSS, TM1, or otherwise, absolutely requires a separate non-production license for PVU deployments. It is a separate part number, and it's roughly half the cost. So anyone who's currently licensed just the PVU production license and are spreading those between prod and non-prod should absolutely consider acquiring the non-production licenses and reducing the number of PVUs to right size with their environment, which again is an exercise we can help with. And I think we have time for one last question here before we drop. When do you suggest PVU over authorized user? That's kind of a complex question. It really depends on how the user is going to interact with the system. But in most scenarios, the PVU metric is going to be advantageous for deployments with more than a few hundred users. Depending upon the product and the type of license, usually somewhere between 300 and 500 users is going to be the breakpoint there.
Great, thanks, Carson. And an astute viewer here pointed out that we did a previous webinar on the license change that you discussed back in 2014. So again, I encourage you to go out to the Centurus.com resource site, and I think if you do a search on license, you'll be able to probably find that webinar and reference it. So thanks for pointing that out to us. So with that, thanks, Carson, for some great content there. Hope that helped you all demystify some of the myriad complexities in the IBM software licensing model, and help you understand that Centurus can really help you out around potentially, taking advantage of some cost savings, reducing your audit risk, and optimizing your IBM software assets. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. Again, you can reach us at Centurus.com. You can email us at info@Centurus.com or reach us at the phone number here. We also invite you to connect with us on various social media platforms. We're on LinkedIn, SlideShare, YouTube, Twitter, and of course, Facebook. So we look forward to seeing you through one of those mediums and on our next Centurus Business Analytics Education Series webinar. So thank you for your time today. Have a great rest of your day.